This is the story of a boy from a small working-class town who had no wealth, no influential contacts, and none of the usual advantages that shape Formula One champions, and who grew into one of the greatest drivers the sport has ever seen. Lewis Hamilton didn't spend his childhood around Monaco's glamorous circuits or among the wealthy figures of the paddock. He was raised in Stevenage, an ordinary town just outside London. While future rivals grew up inside powerful racing families with established motorsport connections, Lewis had nothing more than a remote-controlled car, an enormous dream, and a father willing to give up everything to help him chase it. Even after rewriting Formula One's record books, Hamilton still struggled to earn acceptance from everyone around him. The sport had long been shaped by tradition and privilege, and he didn't fit the mold. But his story was never only about winning races. It was about overcoming barriers of class, race, and expectation. Every time people questioned whether he belonged, he answered with belief, determination, and results. To understand how that happened, we have to go back to where it all began. Stevenage wasn't the place people expected future champions to come from. A modest Hertfordshire town of council estates, concrete housing blocks, and football fields boxed in by chain-link fences. That was Lewis Hamilton's childhood, defined less by privilege and more by everyday struggle. Lewis was born in 1985 to Anthony Hamilton and Carmen Larbalestiere. His parents separated when he was 2. He stayed with his mother until he was 12, then moved in with his father, stepmother, and half-brother Nicholas, who was born with cerebral palsy. Despite the challenges, Anthony noticed something remarkable in his son early on. Lewis was fascinated by anything involving speed. He'd sit glued to the television watching Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna dance through rain-soaked circuits with fearless precision. Then one Christmas, Anthony gave him a simple remote-controlled car. Lewis quickly mastered RC racing, regularly beating competitors, including adults, much older than him. His reactions and instincts were impossible to ignore. That was the moment Anthony decided to help Lewis chase a career in motorsport. The only obstacle was money. Karting wasn't just expensive. For a working-class family, it was almost unreachable. Anthony took on 4 jobs: IT contractor by day, dishwasher by night, doing whatever it took to cover fuel, tires, and entry fees. Most of the kids Lewis raced against had professional coaches, big sponsors, and the newest equipment money could buy. Lewis had second-hand gear, relentless determination, and a father who refused to quit. If he wanted to be noticed, there was only one option: keep winning. And that's exactly what he did. Lewis began karting at 8 years old, and it didn't take long for people to realize they were watching someone special. Fierce and fearless behind the wheel, yet calm and composed away from it. Ayrton Senna was his hero, and that influence showed in every corner he attacked without hesitation. By 10, he'd already won his first British karting championship. Then came a moment that would become part of Formula One history. At the 1995 Autosport Awards, young Lewis walked up to Ron Dennis, head of the McLaren F1 team, barely tall enough to stand beside him, and introduced himself. "Hi, I'm Lewis Hamilton. I won the British Championship, and one day I want to race for your team."
No hesitation. I think I just went up to him and said, "Hi, I'm Lewis Hamilton. I won the British Championship. One day I want to be racing your cars."
Dennis smiled, signed an autograph, and replied, "Call me in 9 years. We'll sort something out then." Lewis and his family couldn't afford to wait 9 years. The financial pressure was mounting every season. Then, in a life-changing twist, Ron Dennis reached out. Not 9 years later, just 3. At only 13, Lewis was signed to McLaren's Young Driver program, the youngest driver, and the first black driver, ever to land a Formula One development contract. McLaren covered his racing costs, and Mercedes soon joined to support his journey. From there, his career accelerated fast, karting to Formula Renault to Formula 3, then GP2, where he stunned the racing world with overtakes and racecraft well beyond his years. To outsiders, it looked like every door was opening for him. Lewis knew better. Every opportunity had been fought for. Every doubtful glance in the paddock was a reminder that he hadn't been born into motorsport privilege. He wasn't racing only to collect trophies. He was racing to earn respect. In 2007, Lewis made his Formula One debut, not with a midfield team learning the ropes, but at McLaren, stepping straight into a garage shared with 2-time world champion Fernando Alonso. From the moment the lights went out in Melbourne, he looked completely at home, third in his first Grand Prix, second in the next, then another second and another. 6 races in, he won in Montreal. By mid-season, the rookie was leading the World Championship. Success came with tension. Alonso had expected to lead the team, not battle a newcomer who refused to back down. And as Hamilton kept matching, and often beating, the reigning champion, their relationship fell apart, coming to a head in Hungary when Alonso deliberately blocked Hamilton in the pit lane during qualifying. What began as a championship fight became an internal war. Hamilton still had a real shot at the title heading into the final race, but a gearbox problem and a costly mistake ended the dream. He fell short by a single point. A painful ending, but never a failure. It was a message to the grid. This rookie wasn't just gifted, he was already championship material. A year later, he proved it. 2008 was the season of redemption. Hamilton opened with victory in Australia, won again in Monaco, and produced one of the greatest wet weather drives in F1 history at Silverstone, lapping nearly the entire field. The title battle swung back and forth all year against relentless pressure from Felipe Massa, coming down to the final race in Brazil. Massa crossed the line first, and for 38 unforgettable seconds, Brazil believed their hero had won the championship. Then, on the final corner of the final lap, Hamilton overtook Timo Glock to claim the 5th place he needed to win the title by a single point. The grandstands fell into stunned silence as Hamilton's garage erupted. At 23, he became the youngest world champion in history at the time, and the first black driver ever to win a Formula One title. The barriers had been broken, but the toughest chapters were still ahead. McLaren gradually lost its competitive edge afterward, and off the track, Lewis was evolving, embracing fashion, music, and a lifestyle that stood apart from F1's traditional image. Critics said he was distracted, that his focus had disappeared. What they missed was that Lewis had never wanted to fit someone else's version of what a driver should be. He wanted to succeed without hiding who he was. At the end of 2012, he stunned the paddock by leaving McLaren, the team that developed him, for Mercedes, who'd managed just 1 win in 3 seasons. It looked like career suicide. But behind closed doors, Mercedes was preparing for F1's next era. A new generation of hybrid turbo power units arriving in 2014. And Mercedes had spent years building what would become the benchmark engine. Hamilton partnered with Toto Wolff and reunited with his old karting rival, Nico Rosberg. When the hybrid era began, Mercedes didn't just improve. They transformed Formula One, dominating qualifying and locking out front rows. The only driver capable of standing in Hamilton's way was Rosberg, and their rivalry became one of the sport's most intense, wheel-to-wheel in Bahrain, colliding at Spa. Hamilton won 11 races in 2014 and sealed the title in Abu Dhabi, no longer the prodigy proving himself, but a complete champion in control of the sport. The following season was even more dominant, earning him a 3rd championship and matching his hero Senna's title tally. In 2016, the Rosberg rivalry reached its peak. Rosberg won the opening 4 races. Hamilton fought back hard, and they collided again in Spain and Austria, turning the Mercedes garage into one of the most divided environments in F1. It came down to Abu Dhabi, where Hamilton deliberately slowed the pace, hoping to back Rosberg into the chasing pack. It wasn't enough. Rosberg won the title, then shocked the sport days later by announcing his retirement. From 2017, Hamilton stood alone as Mercedes' undisputed leader. The drama had faded. Only history remained. By the late 2010s, Hamilton had secured his place among the greatest athletes of his generation, but he was clearly chasing something bigger than statistics. He began speaking openly about climate change, diversity, racial inequality, and mental health, conversations the sport had long avoided. After George Floyd's murder in 2020, Lewis refused to stay silent, urging F1 to take a clear position. The paddock responded, and he took a knee before races and wore shirts carrying pointed messages. He founded the Hamilton Commission to investigate why Black people remain so underrepresented in motorsport, funding research and educational initiatives, and partnered with Mercedes on the Accelerate 25 program, aiming for a quarter of new hires to come from underrepresented backgrounds. Fashion became another part of his identity. Collaborations with Tommy Hilfiger, appearances at Paris Fashion Week, the Met Gala, and major runways made him far more than a racing driver in the public eye. Critics called it flashy, a distraction. But Lewis had spent his career hearing people tell him who he should be, and by then had no intention of changing to make anyone comfortable. Through every headline, his hunger to win never faded, because one prize still remained, a record-breaking 8th World Championship. The 2021 season became one of the greatest title fights in the sport's history. Hamilton against Max Verstappen, both chasing something historic. Brilliant overtakes, dramatic crashes, and controversial penalties defined the year. They collided at Imola, Silverstone, and Monza, before it all came down to Abu Dhabi, level on points. For 57 laps, Hamilton drove almost flawlessly, an 8th title within reach. Then a late crash brought out the safety car, and race director Michael Masi made the unprecedented call to let only selected lapped cars unlap themselves before the restart, placing Verstappen, on fresh tires, directly behind Hamilton with 1 lap left. Verstappen passed him. Hamilton lost the race, the championship, and the chance to stand alone in F1 history. Mercedes filed protests. The result stood. For weeks, Hamilton stayed silent in public, and for the first time, people genuinely wondered if he'd come back. He did, with the same quiet determination that had defined his career. But the car couldn't match his ambition. New 2022 regulations left Mercedes struggling with severe porpoising, while Red Bull surged ahead, and for the first time in his career, Hamilton finished a season without a single win. 2023 showed signs of improvement, but the wins and the 8th title still didn't come. Even so, he never stopped showing up, because true champions are defined by how they respond when everything goes against them. Then, in 2024, Hamilton stunned the sport again. Not with something on track, but with one signature. He was leaving Mercedes to join Scuderia Ferrari for 2025, at the age of 40. The question everywhere was why leave the team where he'd achieved almost everything for one still searching for consistent championship success? For Hamilton, the answer was simple. He wanted one last challenge, one final chapter, one more mountain to climb. If he could lead Ferrari back to a championship and end their long title drought, it would be one of the greatest endings the sport had ever seen. Early testing showed the challenge would be far from easy, and the media questioned whether he'd left it too late. Lewis answered the only way he knew how, by getting to work, spending hours with Ferrari's engineers, mentoring younger drivers, and restoring belief inside Maranello. He gave the Tifosi hope. Podiums returned, flashes of brilliance reminded everyone the talent hadn't gone anywhere, but the 8th title stayed just out of reach. Perhaps that was never really the point. By this stage, Hamilton's legacy could no longer be measured only in titles. It had become about the fight, for change, for inclusion, for being heard, and for leaving behind something greater than race wins. In Formula One, greatness is usually measured in numbers: wins, poles, fastest laps, championships. Hamilton has all of them, but his impact goes far beyond statistics. He didn't just rewrite the record books, he redefined what a Formula One driver could represent: a champion, a fashion icon, an activist, a mentor, a disruptor, a global superstar. From the karting circuits of Stevenage to the podiums of Monaco, Monza, and Melbourne, he carried the weight of history as the sport's first, and still only, black driver, pushing F1 to confront conversations it had long avoided, and turning every setback into another reason to keep moving forward. Whether that long-awaited 8th World Championship ever comes, and whether Ferrari becomes the final glorious chapter of his career, one fact won't change. Lewis Hamilton transformed Formula One, and in doing so, inspired millions of people to believe that no dream is too ambitious, no voice too small to matter, and no barrier impossible to overcome. He didn't just race in Formula One. He helped drive the sport itself into a new era.